Hello and welcome to Transfermarkt. My name is Stefan Bienkowski and today I'm joined by my esteemed colleague Ben Littlemore, and we are going to discuss Jhon Durán and his remarkable form for Aston Villa this season. Once again, the super sub for Villa as they beat Wolves 3-1 in the Premier League. And he's really beginning to make a name for himself in the Premier League. A player who's linked with a lot of clubs in the summer, and we felt now would be a good time to take a look at his form, where he is in his career, and perhaps most importantly for us at Transfermarkt, his market value. When we take a quick look at his market value today, it's already at an impressive €20 million for a 20-year-old player. When he moved from Chicago Fire for €16.5 million, he was worth €6 million at the time. And we have seen that kind of go up quite steadily. In March 2023, it rose to €12 million. October 2023, it rose to €17 million. Excuse me. And then in May of this year, his market value rose to €20 million. And then why don't you just kind of give a bit more context behind where he ranks at Villa in the world, among his teammates, etc., just so we know exactly where Durán stands at this point in time.
Yeah, there's no doubt Jhon Durán has been one of the stories of the Premier League season. I think every time he comes on now, sort of even every neutral fan wants him to get a goal. But yeah, where does he rank in the world, in the Premier League, among players in his position? Well, he's currently the 462nd most valuable player in the world with his 20 million market value, the 197th most valuable in the Premier League, and the 14th most valuable in the Aston Villa squad. If we look at his age, he's born in 2003, which makes him 20 years old. He's the 24th most valuable player born in that year from all positions. He's the third most valuable Colombian player, only behind Luis Diaz and Daniel Munoz. And if we go to his position alone, he's the 68th most valuable striker in the world. From players 20 years old or younger, he's the 7th most valuable player. But of course, there's a Premier League market value update coming up on October the 1st, so he could be in for yet another rise.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're probably wondering, what does all that have to do with this player at Aston Villa trying to score goals in the Premier League? Well, it's all contextualised. Everything we do at Transfermarkt, all the market values we put together, we do compare these players based on nationality, their age, their position, and where they play. And let's kind of focus on where they play in terms of Jhon Durán right now, Ben, because he's had a tremendous start this season. He's got 4 goals in 6 games. As I mentioned, he came on in that Wolves game where Villa were a goal behind. And even though he got the 3rd goal, he was actually quite crucial in the 1st goal in the terms of the build-up. Actually, I also watched him in Villa's quite comprehensive win over Young Boys as well, where he came on, and even though he scored a goal which was ruled out, which I thought was quite unfairly ruled out for a very weak handball call, he just seems to be this outstanding player. Comes on and he offers a directness to this Aston Villa team. He's almost like a cheat code for Unai Emery, isn't he? Where if things aren't quite going to plan, you throw Durán on, he just kind of shakes things up, and it often leads to goals.
Yeah, and I think it's a key point you raised there. You can often see players come on for, Man City or Liverpool when they're 5-0 up and get a 6th goal against a tired and depleted defence, but he's scoring important goals. 3 of those goals from the bench in the Premier League have been winning goals. I think the record is 5 in a season, so he's on course to beat that. And like you say, even in the 3-1 win against Wolves, he wins the ball back for the 2nd goal, and then he kills the game with a 3rd goal. So he's scoring key goals. I myself was a little bit surprised in the summer. There was interest from Chelsea and West Ham, and Aston Villa, there was talks they wanted around 40 million plus euros. And I was a little bit surprised because he's only made 3 Premier League starts that they were sort of asking for that fee. But it seems a lot of people in football have just known what's coming with Jhon Durán. Our colleague Manuel Veth, who works in the USA, he's the area manager over there, he says a similar thing when he was at Chicago Fire. He says people were quite surprised at the fee there. But it seems that everyone sort of was aware that this player could explode, and it seems like it's starting to happen this season.
Yeah, so just for anyone who obviously doesn't follow MLS, he only played 28 senior games for Chicago Fire before Aston Villa swooped in for him. And as you said, something very similar could have happened this summer. He could have moved on from Aston Villa. He's now played 55 games for them, but it wasn't far off that if he had left. It wouldn't have been far off that, if he had left for Chelsea or West Ham. And that's the really fascinating thing to me. There's a kind of interesting contrast between him and Ollie Watkins, who's obviously the star player for Aston Villa. Was one of their heroes really last season, getting to top 4, which earned him a spot in the England team. But they are very different players, aren't they, Ben? Ollie Watkins strikes me as a player who can score but also create goals almost in equal measure, which we saw last season. But Durán strikes me as more of this kind of straightforward, direct, penalty box striker, which maybe in previous seasons weren't as in vogue, but right now it seems like, a player who can just simply score goals and be that presence in the box can sometimes be worth their weight in gold.
Yeah, definitely. I think they're very different players. Ollie Watkins primarily likes to run in behind and stretch defences, making great runs in behind and also creating space for those players in the sort of 10 role for Aston Villa coming into midfield. Jhon Durán is more of a focal point, isn't he? He's very strong in the air, holds up the ball well. He is, like you say, a bit of a throwback. And it seems like the headed goal is back in fashion more than ever right now. You see, Arsenal love a set piece. Haaland loves a header. Duran's always knocking one in. So it seems like that's a great option for Aston Villa to have from the bench. I do think it's interesting, though. It's getting to the point where he is too talented to be left on the bench every week. Nobody wants that super sub tag, do they? I mean, Jermaine Defoe used to hate it, the player with the most goals from the bench in Premier League history. But you can't really take Watkins out either. Watkins scored a brace against Everton, and look at the season he had last season. He was unlucky perhaps not to be the Premier League player of the season. So he's going to live off that reputation for a while anyway and start games. Could you play them both together? I don't know in Unai Emery's system if that would work. So it does pose the question, does Jhon Durán need to move on maybe perhaps in January or next summer to get starting football? Obviously, Aston Villa are going to have a lot of games this season in the Champions League as well, so he's going to have a big part to play. And I'm sure Aston Villa, given the start he's had, will want to keep him. But do you think perhaps that maybe January some other clubs might come back in for Durán?
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because you suspect that he probably did sit down with Unai Emery after they obviously turned down those offers, and he said, look, if you want to keep me, you have to use me. Obviously, I'm sure he understands that Watkins is the main man there, but Emery has made a concerted effort to bring him in just about every game. He has been a sub. He hasn't started any games so far this season, but he has already racked up 161 minutes over the course of 6 games. But as you said, it'll be interesting to see if or when that does flip. For example, if Watkins picks up an injury and Durán starts starting games, does he keep that position? And then from then on in, he's Aston Villa's starter player. Or is it going to be a similar situation to last season where it's Watkins' position, Durán has to stay as a super sub, and then that kind of maybe leads to kind of some tension going forward. And this actually maybe quite conveniently moves us on to the next section of the video where we want to talk about Durán's market value going forward, because there are 2 major things that stick out to me here, Ben. Number 1 is potential transfers in the future, and number 2 is where he ranks among other players of his profile, his position, his age. But let's talk about that potential transfer going forward. As you mentioned, 40 million euros was the fee kind of quoted in the summer. And when we do put together our market values, we do consider transfer fees into consideration. So if he does move on for something like 40 million euros, say next summer or in January, which I'm sure Aston Villa fans would not be happy about, that would have a big impact on pushing his market value up in the future. But I do kind of, unless you wanted to add anything to that, I'll maybe move on to this list of strikers that we have that he's comparable to in age. But is there anything? I would be very surprised if Villa did sell him in January. I think if they were obliged to, they'd probably actually maybe ask for even more than that. But like I said, if he can't nail down that first team spot, if he's still playing second fiddle to Ollie Watkins, you could see him maybe pushing for a move next summer, couldn't you?
Yeah, definitely. I think another thing to consider is his age. He's only 20 years old still, so he's got a lot of time to be getting starts in the Premier League, and also all of the traditional big 6 clubs in the Premier League right now are pretty sorted for a striker. Chelsea was maybe the only one, and Nicholas Jackson has started the season very well. So perhaps a move is better to wait until at least next summer. Just a reminder to people as well, you can head over to the Transfermarkt website and have your say on the Premier League market value update on the 1st of October. How much do you think Jhon Durán should be worth? You can head over to, if you go to our website, there's a big banner at the top that takes you to that article where you can have your say on the forum.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that's also worth bearing in mind is Aston Villa's kind of record transfer fees. They are a club that are very good at getting good fees for their players. We saw Moussa Diaby moving for 60 million euros a summer. Jack Grealish for 117.5 million euros, but I think it was a record fee in the Premier League at the time. And even like Douglas Luiz moving for 52 million euros as well. So if Durán was to move from Villa against their wishes, you'd expect him to pick up a big fee for him, and as a result, his market value would shoot up. But let's focus on the players that are in his class, if we will, and looking at what kind of what he's up against. As you mentioned, he's already the 3rd most viable Colombian player, which I suspect is somewhat behind his hype, especially when he was obviously playing in MLS. I think a lot of big clubs looked at impressive striker, young player, obviously Colombian background. That tends to bode quite well in European football. But as we pull up this list then of the players who are 20 or younger who play centre forwards, and we can see that Duran is already the 7th most valuable player in the world. Looking at that list of players, where do you think he ranks amongst his peers? Do you think his market value is quite fair compared to those players, or do you think there's something he should maybe be stepping above this season?
Yeah, I'm just having a look at that list now, and yeah, I think we're all expecting Duran to perhaps go up in market value this month, or if not this month, certainly in the full update in December. You look at some of those players in the list. Vitor Roque has really struggled since going to Barcelona. He's 4th on the list at 30 million, so you can perhaps expect his market value to either freeze or go down, and Duran to be ahead of him perhaps soon. You look at some of the other players in the list, they're not really having as much of an impact in a big league. Yusufa Moukoko is just above him at 22 million. Evan Ferguson at 50 million is struggling to get game times. You could perhaps expect another downgrade for him. Endrick is obviously number 1 at 60 million, who's had a really good start at Real Madrid. But I think in perhaps 6 months' time, that list could look quite different. And I think Duran is probably likely to certainly be in the top 5 among strikers 20 years old or younger.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, obviously, if you look at that list, there's not a huge amount of players there that have demanded huge fees. Obviously, Roque and Endrick are the exceptions there. And, Endrick obviously is enjoying quite a good start at Real Madrid, having scored that tremendous goal in the Champions League last week. But on the whole, we're looking at young players who've kind of come through, and it's more or less based on buzz more than anything else, or hype. Evan Ferguson's the clear one there, who had a very kind of good kind of breakthrough season at Brighton, but hasn't quite managed to kind of add anything to that. So, we could maybe even see both of them meeting in the middle at some point this season or in the coming years, where if Ferguson doesn't really manage to kind of step on and kind of establish himself as Brighton's main striker or as a kind of top Premier League talent, then, we could see, as you said, Jhon Durán kind of stepping above him and leapfrogging him. But as you said, it'd be really interesting to see how Durán ranks amongst these under-20 players, and obviously when he steps up to under-21 rank as well, where there's even more players in there. A number of players have already kind of broke the €100 million mark. Yeah, I mean, unless there's anything else you want to add, Ben, there, I think we could probably wrap that up. But yeah, in terms of, I guess best thing to do is maybe both of us kind of suggest, maybe not give exact numbers as to where Duran's market value could land in the coming season, but I'm assuming we both expect him to be moving upwards quite quickly in the future.
Yeah, of course. There's so many factors that go into our market values, and there'll be plenty of discussions that go into this. But yeah, I would say right now I'd probably expect him to move up to around 30 or 35 million euros market value.
Yeah, I wouldn't be disagreeing with you there. As always, you guys can let us know what you think in the comments below. How do you think Jhon Durán's done at Aston Villa? Do you think he'll be a starter for Aston Villa come the end of the season? And as Ben said, if you want to give your opinions on Duran's market value ahead of the new Premier League market value update at the end of the month, click on the link in the description below and that'll take you straight there and you can have your thoughts and opinions in that spot. But until next time, thanks for watching. Please make sure you subscribe and like the video, and we'll speak to you soon.